Some people are older than countries. Now, not older as in one person has been alive for 4,000 years. That would be truly terrifying and also very, very tough for passport control. I mean, there are communities alive today whose cultures, ancestors, languages, and connections to the land go back further than many countries drawn on our current map, because countries are actually surprisingly new. A lot of countries are basically babies wearing flags. Some borders were drawn a few hundred years ago, some were drawn after wars, some were drawn by people who looked at the map and picked up a ruler and said, yeah, that line looks official enough. But people were already living there. Before the passports, before the national anthems, before the flags, before the signs that said, welcome to this country, there were people living on the land, telling stories, hunting, farming, fishing, trading, migrating, naming places, and building cultures. So today, we're not talking about prehistoric people like they are museum objects. That's the wrong way to think about it. We are talking about modern people alive today whose histories are older than modern countries around them. And once you see the world like this, the map starts to look a little bit silly. Welcome to Stick of the World. Bad drawings, real facts. So first, Australia. Australia as a modern country is very, very young. The Commonwealth of Australia was actually formed in 1901. So if Australia was a person, it would still be looking for its birth certificate. But the Aboriginals have been living on mainland Australia for at least 65,000 years. 65,000 years. So that means people were living there long before the pyramids, long before Rome, long before England, and long before anyone was arguing about what a flag should actually look like. The country name is young, but the people are not. And that's the point. The modern map will show you a big country called Australia, color it in one shade, and put a label on it, and move on like that explains everything. But underneath that one label are hundreds of Aboriginal nationals, languages, lands, stories, connections to the country that goes back incredibly deep in time. The map says Australia, but history says, slow down. There's a lot more that's actually here. Now, let's jump all the way to southern Africa. There are the San and the Khoisan people whose histories are connected to some of the deepest human ancestry that we actually know about. Now, this doesn't mean that they are unchanged. It doesn't mean that they are stuck in the past. That is lazy thinking. They are modern people living in modern countries with modern day challenges. But their ancestral history reminds us that Southern Africa is not just a place on the bottom of the map. It is part of one of the deepest stories of all of humanity itself. So when a country on the map says, I am 100 years old, the land underneath says, that's cute. Because human history did not begin when borders became official. Now, our next example is America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Now, the USA is less than 300 years old as a country, and Canada as a confederation is also young in the grand timeline of human history. But indigenous people were living across North America thousands and thousands of years before those countries' names actually existed. Archaeological and genetical evidence places people in North America at least 23,000 years ago and as far back as 30,000 years ago. So imagine a stick figure country walking in with sunglasses saying, I own this map now. And the land replies, people were already here before your paperwork. Again, this is not about ancient history that disappeared. Indigenous nations are still here. Their culture, their governments, their languages, their communities continue today, even after enormous pressure from colonization, displacement, and forced assimilation. That is why this video is not really about who is the oldest, like some weird world history competition. It is all about remembering that modern borders are not the beginning of the story. And with that being said, let's take a look at Northern Europe. The Sámi people, who live across what we now call modern-day Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. But that's exactly the point, what we now call. The people and the cultural region came before the modern border lines. The map splits the area into 4 countries, and the border lines look very confident. But culture doesn't always stop because the line was drawn. Reindeers don't look at the border and say, ah yes, international law. People moved, traded, spoke, herded, and lived across landscapes long before modern maps tried to organize everything into neat and tidy boxes. So the map says Norway here, Sweden there, Finland here, Russia there, but the older story says that this is Sápmi too. So let's shift gears all the way towards the east. And we're looking at the Ainu. Now, the Ainu are indigenous people associated especially with the Hokkaido and northern region around Japan. Now, on a normal world map, Hokkaido might look like just the top island of Japan. Small, tidy, easy to label. But maps are terrible at showing what people have actually survived. The Ainu story includes cultural survival, pressure to assimilate, and the fight to recognize rather than just erase inside a modern state. And that's another thing countries sometimes do. They don't just draw borders around land, they also decide what stories get placed in the center and which stories get pushed to the edge. And that's why this topic matters today. Because when we say ancient people still alive today, we have to be very, very careful. Because they're not living fossils. They're not before pictures of humanity. They are people alive today with phones, with jobs, politics, music, schools, problems, humor, arguments, and normal modern lives. But they also carry histories that are older than the countries that many of us used to understand the world. So here is a simple way of thinking about it. Countries are labels, people are history. Flags can be new, borders can be new, a government can be new, but the people connected to the land might have a story that started thousands or even tens of thousands of years earlier. That doesn't mean that the modern country is fake. It just means that the country is only one layer of the story. The map is like a badly drawn sandwich. The top layer is the country name. Underneath are the borders, and under that are the old languages, old culture, old roots, old names, old memories, and the old relationships with the land. And if you only look at the top layer, you miss the entire meal. So next time you look at the map, remember this. Some of these countries are young, but some of those borders are even younger. But some of the people living have history so old that the country itself looks like a baby holding a flag. So the world is not just made up of countries, it's made up of people who were there before the countries learned how to spell their own name. And that is why some people are older than countries. Bad drawings, real facts.